Okay, well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us. Kathleen Mckenna is professor at Suny Broome. She teaches criminal law and public speaking. She has a Juris Doctor degree from Georgetown University and a master in the science of foreign service from the same university. Apart from being a professor, she's also coordinator of International Virtual Exchange in Suny Broome, where she has worked tirelessly, collaborating with the students from many other countries, especially students from Guanajuato. She has worked for many years now with Professor David Froome and the English Department of Universidad de Celaya. She has also a really enthusiastic group of students. She met there in New York and she supported them, and they keep in touch. So she is always up to date with what's happening here in Celaya. So, well, I think I just let the microphone to her. Welcome.
Thank you, Roberto. Could we move to the next slide, please? Okay, and even the next. Okay, so I want to make sure that you know where I am, because I'm in New York State, but sometimes people think that that means I'm in New York City, and I am not in New York City. I'd like to take a look at the map if we could together. So if we could look at the map of the US, which is next, you can see where New York State is. New York City is down in the southeast corner of the state, so New York City is lower. It's down in the southeast section of the state. And then maybe we could look at the map of New York State. So this is our state. And then, so there you see New York in the context of the whole country. And then just one slide more, you can see the state itself. There we go. Could you highlight New York City is down in the southern part. So New York City you see down there. And I am in Binghamton, which is our northwest of there. So you can see Binghamton no more to the west. What I want you to see is that we're not in New York City. We are about 3 hours away from New York City. Just about the same distance, about 300 kilometers, so about the same distance as Celaya is from Mexico City. And interestingly, yes, Binghamton is right there. The area that I live in is Binghamton, and it's also known as Broome County. So the county includes that general area there. Our county has a population of about 200,000 people, and New York City obviously has a much larger population. I think it's a little bit smaller than Mexico City. So our distance is about the same as the distance from Celaya to New York to Mexico City. One thing that I'd like to say is that perhaps you can see something similar happening in Mexico. What is beginning to happen here is that the hospitals in New York City are so crowded. Oh, okay, so there is our governor. Wondering if people could mute, if all the other folks could mute. So our governor has gotten a lot of press. I just listened to his press conference today at 11:30 my time. It's Andrew Cuomo. When I think of his leadership, I would say he is very confident. He's very decisive. You never have to guess what he's thinking because he will tell you. He's very willing to use his power. One of the things that he mentioned today is that he is going to order hospitals in New York State that have extra ventilator equipment to sell them to the state so that the state can use them elsewhere where they are needed. And he said, you know, of course, it's human nature to want to keep something in case you might need it in the future. But he said, as your governor, I am going to order you to sell that ventilator to me, and I will replace it later. I will replace it, I will give you cash, but I can't let you keep a ventilator in a city that doesn't need it when it's needed somewhere else. And one of the reporters said to Andrew Cuomo, well, do you think somebody will sue you? Do you know if you really have the right to do that? I think he does. I think that government has the power of what we call eminent domain. So I think he has the power. But Andrew Cuomo can be very macho. So something he said today was, well, you think they might sue me? He said, I get sued 5 times a day, so bring it on. You can sue me if you want to. So Andrew Cuomo, it's interesting as we study the different leadership styles of our leaders. A lot of people really like him right now. A lot of people are wishing that he were the Democratic candidate for president. He says he has no interest in that. We'll see. He certainly in the past has thought about it. His style can be abrasive at times. He's kind of a typical New Yorker. He fits the stereotype of a typical New Yorker, but he has made decisions. He made a decision to close all of the universities in the State University of New York earlier than a lot of people did. And he didn't give our presidents much notice. In fact, they thought they had more time than they did. So he is a very take charge, decisive kind of a person. Okay, if we could go to the next slide, please. So I'm wondering where you are. When I think of you, I have a picture of where you might be. And I'm hoping that you are not in El Callejón del Beso. And I think you know why, but let's just be clear about that. Let's move to the next picture, please. Okay, I certainly hope you are not up in the balconies of El Callejón del Beso. As I understand that story, the woman's dad killed her because of this kind of interaction that she had with her love. I guess my hope is that that story might be reinterpreted as a story of encouraging healthy distancing, social distancing, and that maybe we could think of her father as the metaphor for the coronavirus or COVID-19. So her dad wanted her to engage in social distancing, healthy distancing. I know that your government is promoting that as well. So you need to have your healthy distance. And I love the Susana, your healthy distance. In the US, we're calling it social distancing. And some experts are saying that that is a bad phrase. We need to think of it as physical distancing, but connecting socially. I mean, if you think about it, here I am in my kitchen and I'm able to connect with all of you. So I think it's important to realize that this kind of distancing, the physical distancing we're doing, is not necessarily isolation. It doesn't have to be emotional isolation. Last night we had a Zoom call, my friends from college and I, and there were 9 of us on that call, and we could see each other's faces. And some people had a glass of wine, some people had a bottle of beer, some people had tea or water. But we were together just like we were when we were college students. We still really were able to connect emotionally. And frankly, I think that using this kind of technology is important for our sanity as well. So I'm grateful for it. Okay, what I'd like to do is move in to telling you what I hope El Callejón del Beso looks like right now. You just can't get 2 meters away from somebody there. So I'm hoping that it's empty right now. All right, let's move on to think about leaders. And what I did was I tried to look at leaders both from history and from the current times who I think we could learn something from. And one of the things that I'm noticing is that it seems to me that the good leaders are actually folks who are able to study history and to learn from it. And I know sometimes people complain about studying history in school, but let's take a look at what we can learn from history. If we could move to the next slide. So what we're learning now, and we're hearing it all from all of our leaders, is that we need to engage in social distancing. This was a difficult lesson for our students to embrace, I think for young people in general. I think you saw probably some news footage of students from the US on spring break in Florida, in Mexico, and they had what they called coronavirus parties, where they put their arms around one another and they just kind of laughed at the virus. We know from the data that it is possible, that it is less likely that a young person will die, but it is not impossible that a young person will die. We had an infant die in the US. Somebody under 12 months old has died. One of the things the experts are saying too is that you don't know for sure what else you have going on in your body. So the two reasons you really want to engage in social distancing for yourself, obviously, is your own health. Second of all, if you have an older person in your life who you love, you don't want to be carrying the virus to that older person. And the notion of social distancing is that we're trying to slow down the spread of the virus because the hospitals simply don't have the capacity. Really, I don't think anywhere in the world, but certainly it's worse in some places than others, and it's not very good in the US. The hospitals don't necessarily have the capacity to care for everyone. So if we could go to the next slide, if we could see a little bit from the history, this is a quote that you've probably heard before. Those who don't learn history are doomed to repeat it. The experts here in the US are looking a lot at 1918. If we could look at that slide next, please. So in 1918, I guess this was really the last huge global pandemic. We've had serious epidemics with the Ebola and SARS. This one came to the US and it was studied pretty extensively in the US. This is measuring the number of deaths per 100,000 people in two different cities that had two different policies for handling the virus. You can see that Philadelphia had many more deaths, and we'll look at the actual numbers, and a huge spike around some event. So we'll want to take a look at that event. You'll notice that St. Louis managed to achieve what they're asking us all to do, which is to flatten the curve. St. Louis managed to they spread them out over a longer period of time, and there were not as many of them, which made the cases easier for the hospitals to handle, given their capacities. So let's dig into these numbers for a moment and figure out what happened. Go ahead if you would, please. Okay, so if we look at the city of Philadelphia, they had 748 people for every 100,000 die. Obviously, this is the only way you can compare places of different sizes. You have to look at their data based on for every 100,000 people. So in Philadelphia, for every 100,000 people, 748 died. In St. Louis, about less than half died. So again, if we want to dig deeper, try to understand why, let's go to the next slide if we could. Okay, so what's the difference? Well, the difference really is in Philadelphia, they let them go ahead, even though they knew the virus was in the community. They had a huge parade with 200,000 people, and they wanted people buying bonds to support World War II. You had people of all these different ages there, the troops, Boy Scouts, marching bands, and that spike that you saw, that spike was related to this parade. Now, it may have come, 1 week or 2 weeks later, depending on, I don't know what the time period was for that virus to develop and to kill people, but it was definitely that spike was related to this parade that they had, because that too, like the coronavirus, was a very contagious virus. Let's take a look at what they did in St. Louis. So in St. Louis, as soon as they knew that they had even 2 active cases, they said the schools need to close, the churches need to close, and people cannot gather. You can never have more than 20 people gathering at one time. One of the things that Dr. Fauci talks about, and I'll talk more about him, is that he says that the virus is always farther ahead than we think it is, because it's gestating, it's growing, it's there. St. Louis said, we know it's here. We know that it has hit some people in our community. It's invisible, and it takes a little while for the symptoms to develop. Dr. Fauci often says that when you feel like you're overreacting, you're probably doing the right thing because the virus is ahead of you, you just can't see it yet. So it needs to be taken very seriously, and you can see that by taking it seriously, St. Louis was able to have fewer than half as many deaths as the city of Philadelphia had in that 1918 pandemic. So I think we need to study history. I would like to say that we need to study recent history as well. I think that it would behoove you in Mexico to be watching China, South Korea, Italy, the US. And then I'm also particularly interested in watching the places that have had some success. I mean, South Korea is often counted as successful. And frankly, right now, China is, their numbers are better than the US numbers have been. But there are places like Taiwan and Singapore that have done an even better job. They don't get as much press. But there are trade-offs that they're making. They're tracking their citizens very closely. The experts seem to say, and of course we haven't had a lot of tests, but that we need to be administering a lot of tests to figure out who actually has the disease and who doesn't, and to isolate the people who do have it. And the thinking about the isolation is that it buys us more time. It slows things down. It gives the medical professionals more time to do some research, hopefully to find a treatment, hopefully to find a cure or a vaccine, but also it just addresses the problem that there are not enough beds in the hospitals if everyone is sick at the same time. The way I heard one person describe it was to say, I assume you have had the same problem in Mexico, but here there was not enough toilet paper because everyone wanted toilet paper at the exact same time. Well, now we're finding that there are not enough ventilators in the US because a lot of people need them at the same time. I'd like to move on to talk about another aspect of leadership. One of the things there, you see Angela Merkel, the German chancellor, and really one of the speeches that she gave in the middle of March, where she was calling on people to do hard things. She said, we need you to stay home. We need you to maintain distances. Here's some of what Frau Merkel had to say. We go to the next slide. A friend of mine translated this for me. This is what an epidemic shows us, how vulnerable we all are. It's humbling, how dependent on the considerate behavior of others, but also how we can protect and strengthen one another by working together in solidarity. If we could go on to the next, please. Something else that true leaders do is they have the ability, I think, to see the big picture. If we look at the Director General of the World Health Organization, let's see what he has had to say. This is something just 2 days ago, but he's looking globally. He's looking at the whole picture. And what he has said is that we now have globally 1 million confirmed cases and 50,000 deaths. And we know that there will be more. I remember when I was studying international relations, one of my professors thought about the question of what would it take for everyone in the world to begin to think of themselves as citizens of the earth, as fellow global citizens. And at least one scholar said maybe it would take us finding life on another planet. If we believed we were going to be invaded by another planet, then maybe we would think of ourselves as fellow citizens. I wonder, I hope that this pandemic might nudge us at least a little bit in the direction of thinking of ourselves as fellow citizens of the earth. The Director General had more to say, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that. If we could move on to the next slide. Okay, so he spoke specifically about Africa, Central and South America, and he said, so far, we have not seen large numbers of people so far infected with the virus, and yet we know that the cutbacks on trade, the cutbacks on travel, all of the economic impacts of this are going to fall very heavily on these regions. And I would include Mexico. I don't think I'm telling you anything you don't know, that it's really having a difficult impact economically as well as socially and from a health perspective. I go on a little bit more with what the World Health Director had to say on the next slide. He says, look, we need as a world to offer debt relief. Just as in the US, we're getting some economic assistance from our government. It's a lot of assistance to a lot of people. It's about 10% of our whole national product, so it's a big deal. Again, I think we need to think of ourselves, and as the World Health Director would say, we all need to think of ourselves as citizens of this world. Okay, if we could go on to the next slide. Okay. True leaders speak truth to power. I am assuming you have heard of Dr. Anthony Fauci, who is the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. He is my personal favorite hero in all of this. I have debates with my friends about, do you like Andrew Cuomo better? Do you like Anthony Fauci better? My vote is Anthony Fauci. They're both New Yorkers, by the way. They're both from New York City, and when you hear them speak, you can hear that in their voices. What I like about Anthony Fauci is he is a true scholar. He is a true scientist. He was #1 in his medical school class when he graduated from Cornell University Medical School, and he seems to be unflappable. He is always diplomatic, and he is able to speak the truth to power. He has corrected mistakes that President Trump has made, and he hasn't been fired. And I'm not too worried about him being fired, because if he's fired, I know that Andrew Cuomo will hire him and bring him to New York, and he will continue to speak the truth to the American people. If we could move to the next slide. So our president said, I think it was about a week ago, that he thought, well, we will be done with this by Easter, and I want the churches to be full by Easter. And Anthony Fauci said, not directly, he never quite directly says, President Trump, you're wrong. He's got some amazing diplomacy skills, and I love and admire them. He says to the American people, you don't make the timeline, the virus makes the timeline. When the president was overly optimistic about the fact that malaria medication might be useful, there has been some study, but Anthony Fauci said, look, the science is not in on that. And we had a death from that. We had a man who actually had some malaria pills in his house, and he took them and he died. So what I like I'm thinking again from a leadership perspective, I see Anthony Fauci steady. I see him studying the science. I see him communicating in ways that are appropriate. I know some reporters have said to him, you know, why don't you stop the president from saying things that are wrong? And he says, first of all, he said, look, I can't knock him down and take away the microphone. He said, I can't do that. But what he says is that I can continue to speak the truth to people. He says, I can't change anybody else's style. But I'm 79 years old, and I'm going to just keep speaking the truth. And I am very impressed both with his talent and with his diplomacy. And frankly, he's a courageous person as well. You may have heard about this if you follow the news from the US. There was one time when our president said, he said he was talking about the State Department, and he called them the Deep State Department, implying that there was something evil going on in our Department of State. In that one briefing, one time, we saw Anthony Fauci. He smiled a little bit, he went like this, and then he was calm again. That video got a lot of attention. It was the one time that he quote unquote lost it. But boy, that was not really losing it. When I think of how other people behave when they quote unquote lose it, it was pretty amazing. So here in the US, you can buy donuts with Anthony Fauci's face on them. You can buy socks with his face on them. He's either beloved or hated. There are definitely people who hate him right now, and he needs to have a security force. He has a special security guards now. This is just within the past couple of days. Again, he's saying things that some people don't want to hear, but others of us really appreciate his credibility and his honesty. So if we could move on, please. Okay, so I thought I would think about the question of leaders, getting away from the political leaders and the leaders in science. I'd like to start to engage you students thinking about being leaders yourself. Steph Curry is a professional basketball player. I am not a basketball fan. I meant to look up what team he plays for, but he plays for some NBA basketball team. And I'm guessing some of the students know him. What was pretty amazing about this was he said to Dr. Fauci, he said, I don't think, Steph Curry is 31 years old. He said, I don't think everybody my age is watching your briefings. And he said, but I know you've got a lot of really good information. And I think young people need this information as well. So he said, would you be willing to do a Twitter interview with me? And you can find it out on the web. It's about a 30-minute interview, just under 30 minutes. It was on Twitter. There were 50,000 people who watched it instantaneously. I have now shared it. I think I shared it with David Shrum. I've shared it with my students. What I like about it is I think Steph Curry's a great role model because he said, look, I'm guessing not everybody my age is watching Dr. Fauci's like I am. I think he's pretty cool. I think he knows what he's talking about. And I think he has a good message for young people. So Steph Curry said, look, I'm not a scientist. I'm not going to come up with the cure, but I could use my influence with the people who I influence by saying, hey, come along for half an hour. What else do you have to do? You're stuck at home anyway. Come along, if you would, for an interview with Dr. Fauci. And it's cute because they're both at home. I mean, and Steph Curry's not quite as comfortable with the tech as Dr. Fauci is, but he makes it work. You know, the angle, he's kind of looking down at his computer and he's like, is this working? Is this working? And it is. And there's a real mutual respect between them. Dr. Fauci, when he was in high school, he's short, he's not tall, but he was the captain of his basketball team in high school, and he's got a basketball hoop in his office, a little mini, probably a Nerf basketball. So they were able to bond for a few minutes about basketball, and they were able to just have a good conversation. Steph Curry had collected questions from people and then put them together and posed them for Dr. Fauci, who answered them. So I guess I bring this up to you for a couple of reasons. One is I encourage you to watch it and to share it. And again, he addresses that question of, do young people really need to be taking this seriously? And the answer was yes. He also gets into the question of, when will this be over? How will we know that it's over? And Dr. Fauci talks about somebody who has had the virus then being tested, needing to be tested twice, to have 2 negative blood tests afterwards. So it's clear that the testing, at least knowing how to test, is becoming much more clear. The question is making sure we have more tests available globally, because it looks like tracking is a really important thing for the leaders to do. So good information in there, a tremendous role model in Steph Curry. He uses his cool because I think people find him cool and are more willing to listen to him. And I guess I would say to those of you in the audience, some of you are influencers, some of you are cool, some of you are the kinds of people that people listen to. You need to be a good role model. You need to have accurate information for people, and you need to walk the walk. You need to live this and you show people what to do and why. Okay, if we could move on to the next slide. Okay, this is Jason Rezaian. Jason Rezaian is and his wife, he is a journalist for the Washington Post. He's in charge of the global opinion section. He was taken hostage in Iran, and he had a piece in the Washington Post last Sunday, and he said, I want to share my story with you. If we could go forward to the next slide, please. Okay, it's actually, his story has been translated into Spanish, so I give you a summary here and a link to it in this PowerPoint. He's saying essentially, look, I survived more than a year a year and a half. I was a hostage in an Iranian prison. I had an 8-foot by 8-foot cell, so like 3 meters by 3 meters. He said, I survived, and you can too, because I'm going to teach you what I learned. And some of the things that he learned, he shared, for instance, that he got exercise every day. He would say to himself, I want to go for a walk. And so he would walk inside his cell. He also talked a lot about that it's really a mind game, that getting through what we consider social distancing or lockdown or isolation. So maybe we can mute again and unmute me. Yeah, thank you. Okay. What you can see there is his story is about how he exercised, how he worked within his mind as well. He said that sometimes he would say to himself, you know, people like me. Why do they like me? And he said, well, you know, I'm pretty warm. I'm pretty friendly. I've got a good sense of humor. And then he would say to himself, oh yes, I have a good sense of humor. Let me think about what will I laugh about later today. And he said, I'm going to watch everything the guards do when they bring me my food. And then later I will laugh about everything funny that they did. So so if I could ask people to mute themselves when they come in, that would be helpful. Thank you. If we could go to the next page, please. What I would like you to know is that his video is out there and that you can watch the video. It's only 6 minutes long. It is in English, and he's got a nice sense of humor. One of the things that he says is, you think you are in prison, being asked to stay home. He said, you're really not in prison. You have an awful lot more freedom than you did. It's hard. You're being asked to make some sacrifices. And like Angela Merkel would say, they're sacrifices for the greater good. But certainly they are sacrifices that you can make. You know, in general, there's advice that people often turn to that comes from, like, even from Alcoholics Anonymous. So for instance, one of their pieces of advice to people who are changing behaviors, who are addicted to alcohol and who are trying to give it up, they say you need to just take it, you know, 1 minute at a time. You need to fake it to make it. It's a phrase. You need to pretend that you don't want to drink. And then you need to pretend again, and you need to pretend again. And it's similar about being home. You need to pretend that you want to be there. You need to tell yourself, I'm going to make the best of this. I'm going to exercise. I'm going to eat healthy foods. I'm going to meditate. Here in this area, we're still allowed to go outside to exercise. And usually I walk quite a bit, so I've been walking. But I decided, you know, I used to run a little bit. I did a few 5K runs. So I said, well, maybe I could run a little. So the first day I went to walk mostly, and I would run for 8 steps. And then I would walk for a couple of minutes. And then I would run for 8 steps. And now, yesterday I would go for 40 steps, 5 times longer. And I was able to shorten my time by 1 minute. So you can make these little personal challenges. I now have one room in my house is much cleaner than it used to be. And maybe after this weekend, there will be another room that is clean. But certainly also, I am connecting with people virtually. I make a point to talk to somebody every day by phone, by video, by Zoom. Some people would say when they're trying to figure out who is behind this coronavirus, you know, the Chinese blame the US blames the Chinese. I saw one cartoon that said that it is Zoom that is behind the coronavirus. It used to be that 10 people in one day, 10 million people a day would have Zoom teleconferences. Now it's 200 million people in one day have Zoom teleconferences. So they are behind it. Let me move on a little bit, if we could, and ask you, what would Gandhi do? I came across just by accident a quote from Gandhi a couple of days ago, and I thought that I should include this here as well. If we could go to the next slide. Gandhi's advice in general is to be truthful, to be gentle, and to be fearless. And I'd like to share with you that I had a teleconference earlier today with my criminal law class, and one of the students was very upset. It was clear that he became upset during the meeting. And I thought that he was upset. I thought he was tired at first. You know, he used to work at McDonald's. He worked in the drive-through at McDonald's serving food, and his hours have been cut. I think he said from like 20 hours a week to 3 hours a week. Last time I knew, he was still working there. But then his dad came in, and his dad hugged him, and then his mom came in, and I was trying to figure out why he was so upset. And then he told me that they had just gotten a phone call, and they had just learned that his dad was positive with COVID-19. And when I think about how I can support that student, when I think of all of the advice that I've shared with you, I think I would come back to this advice from Gandhi. Be truthful with yourselves, with others, with your family. Reach out for help when you need it. I think that's a hard thing for us to do sometimes, to just say, I'm sorry, I need some help right now. I think it's important to be gentle with other people. I know in the US, one of the concerns we have is that now people are stuck at home with people who maybe they're experiencing domestic violence, or maybe they are parents who are sometimes abusive towards their children, and how important it is, first of all, for the resources still to be available to those people. I heard something on National Public Radio today reminding us that there is still help for people who are in situations of domestic violence, and they repeated the telephone number that people could call. So be gentle with others, and also be gentle with yourself. What I'm finding, my second day of teaching online, when I was trying to learn all the technology and get it all set up, at 5 o'clock I was so tired. It wasn't just my brain that was tired, my whole body was tired. And I said, okay, I think I'm going to just lay down on the couch. And I slept from 5 o'clock until 8 o'clock, which is not good for sleeping at nighttime. But I think that you need to be gentle. Realize that everything seems to take longer. And of course, to be fearless, to have courage, to do the things that you need to do, but to be kind and gentle with yourself. Around the truth, to listen to the scientists who have the accurate information. And frankly, sometimes just to turn off the news and listen to some music. I'd like to move to my next slide, if I could. I want to wish you a good weekend. And then perhaps like me, you're looking at a map and you're thinking, well, where do I want to go this weekend? What would I like to do this weekend? So as I study this floor plan, I'm trying to figure out, where would I like to go this weekend? I shared it with a friend, and one of my friends said, you know, it has always been on my bucket list to visit the walk-in closet. So I think I will visit the walk-in closet this weekend. For me, it might be the bedroom, and maybe I will do some cleaning, some dusting in there. But I guess my final wish for you is, don't lose your sense of humor. There's a lot of good humor out there, and I think that will help to sustain us as well. But at this point, I'm done with my PowerPoint, and I would like to take your questions if you have questions or comments.
Thank you, Kathleen. If anyone have any question, just raise your hand. You can raise your hand in your controls. Okay, Renata Solano.
Yes.
Hi, Renata.
Hi. Well, I have 3 questions.
Okay.
People will learn about this pandemic. You said that people learn about history. People will learn about this pandemimic to not do the same mistakes.
I think so. I hope so.
Other one is why people don't want to listen to the truth.
Yeah. So people, you're saying some people do not want to listen to the truth?
Yeah, you said that the Dr. Anthony Fauci says the truth, and, or love him or hate it. Why people had that?
Oh, why does anybody
divided?
hate him?
Mm-hmm.
Well, some people don't like him because sometimes he disagrees with the president. And so some people who really love the president don't think he's being disrespectful. So there are some people who say he should be fired because he publicly disagrees with the president. There are other people who love him because he publicly disagrees with the president. I think more important probably is to ask whether he's giving us accurate information. And he just, what I see him doing is saying, I'm studying the science. And he has a very good reputation. He worked in AIDS research. That was where he first became famous in the 1980s here. And one of the things that he did was he invited the protesters into his office to talk to him. And he said, yes, they have some very good points and I will work with them. And he has become friends with people in the HIV positive community. So he's well respected. I mean, I love him so much that I'm not objective about this, I think, but I just have so much respect for his science, his style. I really like his style as well. But I think you need, I mean, certainly the World Health Organization gives good information. I have a student who is a nursing student who does not trust the US government at all. And he only watches what the World Health Organization is saying, because he says that they had made, they were making predictions that the US wasn't really listening to at the beginning. So I think you need to, and obviously you never want to have just one source of information.
Right.
Find, before I came on here, I went to Johns Hopkins University website. They are tracking all of the cases around the world. And I wrote down, the numbers in Mexico, the numbers in US, and I think those papers are in another room right now. I can't remember. But anyway, did you have a third question? I think you said you had three.
Yeah. Why people take this pandemic so light? They don't seem to give them the importance that it is.
I think part of it is that it's invisible. I think it's hard to take things seriously that we can't see. I think it's also, in the US now, there's kind of an interesting contrast because the weather is so beautiful now. We had here a very difficult winter, and now there are flowers. Now we have daffodils, and I can see that there are buds on the trees. So it almost feels like a science fiction movie. It's hard to believe it because of the contrast between this horrible disease, and yet around here, the earth is coming back to life. So I think people need a reality check. I think people need, I guess, I wouldn't want to do this because it would not respect my students' privacy, but maybe people need to witness what I saw this morning, the student who learned that his dad had the virus, or to see the bodies going into freezers in New York City. I mean, it's very real. And we in the US, I think initially we thought, well, that's a Chinese thing, and it's not going to be a problem here. So I think there are times that we just have to believe, in things that we can't necessarily see. And frankly, we're beginning to see it now also. So I guess I should move on and see if we have another question.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
David, go.
I would like to know, because you mentioned about looking at history, and in the comparison you made from New York City to Binghamton and Mexico City to Celaya or Guanajuato, I'm wondering if you can share with us how many confirmed cases you have in Binghamton, and how many, and what measures you're taking. Today I saw a picture of our downtown area that everything was blocked off and nobody's allowed to go there because up until maybe even yesterday, people was paying attention to those stay-at-home orders, and they were still going about life as normal. So I'm wondering if you can make that comparison for us so we can know what to expect here in Guanajuato.
Sure. So in Binghamton, in the last 3 weeks, I have not gone any farther than, say, 1 or 2 kilometers from my house, just to the grocery store and the pharmacy. One of the things that they're doing here, I have not taken advantage of it yet, but they have a time when you can go to the grocery store that's only for the old people. And I meet that requirement now, so I could go during the old people hours. I think people here are finally taking it seriously. I think, like you, we didn't take it seriously when we thought, well, that's China or South Korea or Italy. I think when it hit Italy, people started to realize we, you know, culturally, our area has a lot, and we have a lot of Italian Americans in this area. We have a lot of connections culturally to Italy. In our county, we have had I think we have about 40 to 60 confirmed cases out of a population of 200,000. But out of those 40 to 60 cases, we have already had 40 deaths. I'm sorry, not 40, 4 deaths. But that was like a 10% of the confirmed cases. Now, part of that may be that we're only testing the really sick people right now. As we start to test more people, I think we'll you know, the number of survivors will be higher here. But we're getting news every day, and every day on the front page of the paper, it seems like it's 1 more death every day in our small community. We have 3 hospitals here, and the hospitals have set up tents outside. And a student of mine who is pregnant had to go to the hospital yesterday for some blood work. And she said that she felt like she was on an army base at the hospital. So it was very well organized, and they do train for these kinds of things. I know one of the things they've done, and this is kind of interesting, and we've seen it in the US before, this desire to kind of build a wall. And one of the things that our county executive did was he closed the bus station here. And he's asking the governor, please give an order that says that people from New York City cannot come here. I heard a governor from Maine. A lot of people have second homes on the beach in Maine, and they're coming from Boston. They're coming from the big cities. They want to get away. And they said to this governor of Maine, what do you say to people from big cities? And she said, well, she said, first we say to you, we love you. We really love you, and we're glad that you have a house here. But I need to tell you, we don't want you to bring the disease here. So if you come, you will need to stay in your house for 14 days when you arrive here. And that's kind of the period of checking to see if you actually have the virus. So I see this desire to put up walls and to keep people away. You know, maybe that will work in the short term. I mean, I think, and again, maybe that will help to flatten the curve. But also something that's happening here that I suspect you may see in Celaya is that our hospitals are starting to take the overflow from New York City because they're running out of beds there. And I suspect you may see something like that in Celaya. And of course, that will impact your healthcare workers and their families as well. Any other questions?
Yeah, we have one more from Jimena Calva. Jimena.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Any
Yeah,
oh,
we can hear you, Jimena.
Thank you. How do you see the measures of the Mexican government that are taking these days?
Well, it sounds like kind of like President Trump, that AMLO was a little slow to take it seriously, right? I mean, he was still joking and hugging and kissing people. It sounds like now he's taking it seriously. I have to say that I like the educational campaign. Maybe because I'm a teacher, I like that you have Susana Distancia. I like creative things like that. I think it's an easy way to get the message out. I'm glad that your schools are closed. I'm glad that people are working from home. I mean, I think one of the things that, and I don't know what kind of a job you're doing with this, what we're realizing in the US is that we have this digital divide, that there are some students who are able to work very well. They have everything they need at home. They have, you know, a smartphone and at least 1 or 2 computers in the house. And then there are students who do not. And on our college, we're really trying to track the students who have just kind of disappeared. And I know in our local school districts, what they're trying to do is to give some work in the form of papers to students who don't have the technology. I don't know in depth what your government is doing. So I guess I should ask you, how do you evaluate what your government is doing? That was Jimena, right?
Yeah, Jimena, what do you think?
I can see that the government is not taking all the necessary measures to doing this, but all I can say is that it's not bad at all, but it's, well, not excellent at all too.
One of the things that I noticed, I mean, I feel very lucky to live in a state where the governor took it very seriously, very early. I mean, California beat him by about 12 hours. California said everybody has to stay home. And it was interesting because the mayor of New York City was saying, I think we need to have a lockdown in New York. And the governor kept saying, no, we don't. And then as soon as the governor of California did it, then our governor did it. I think it was like a competition in my mind. Maybe it's not like this, but suddenly our governor thought it was a good idea too. But he didn't want to call it a lockdown. He said New York State is going on pause for a while. So I guess I give you an example too. The governor of Florida, I think it was only yesterday that he told people they should stay home. And one of the things you can do is, even if your government isn't saying you need to do these things, you can do them anyway, you know, or you can follow the leaders. I guess I would say this: if you have some state governors who seem to be more presidential or stronger with leadership, you personally can choose to follow what they recommend, even if it's not required in your particular area. And I would encourage you to do that.
Thank you. Under participants, if you can see the participants button and you can see the right hand button, please, if you want to participate, please raise your hand. We have time for one more question. Daniel Chavez, please.
Yeah, thanks. What do you think about the people that they ignore the virus and not stay in their house?
They are not welcome at my house. I will not invite them to come to my house. I mean, I think from a law enforcement perspective, it raises interesting questions. Part of me says they should be arrested, but part of me says, well, we can't, you know, we don't want to bother with them all in jail. One of the things that some places are doing is giving them a ticket and they have to pay a fine. So, I mean, you know, that's one of the things that you could do, is to give them a ticket, make them pay some money. You know, in some places, I think they use public shaming. I think in some countries, if you don't vote, they put your name in the paper. I don't know if they could do something like that. I mean, then of course there would be questions of whether it was, you know, a privacy violation or something like that. I think, well, a couple of things come to mind. First and foremost, you need to take care of yourself and take care of your family. I think if you can be an agent for giving this message to people, saying you need to take this seriously. I think one of the things that Frau Merkel, she really spoke to me in the sense of saying, you know, it's almost like we're in a wartime situation and everybody is being asked to contribute something for the greater good. And among young people, what we're really asking you to do is please help keep the older people healthy. Because it is true that it is less likely to be serious for you, but it could end up killing your grandmother if you brought it to her. One of the most difficult things for me, I have a friend who is like a mother to me, and I have not seen her in person for like 3 or 4 weeks. I don't go to her house. I don't go there at all. But I try to talk to her most days, 3 or 4 days a week. I talk to her on FaceTime. FaceTime is easy, and she's able to do FaceTime. And she's actually been able to do Zoom too, which is a nice surprise. But the people who are not complying, I don't know, they're not welcome in my home. Perhaps there should be some kind of a ticket, and perhaps there should be even public shaming of some kind. I'm not sure about the last one, but it runs through my mind. But please educate them. Take care of yourself and try to educate them as well. And let them know. It's a weird thing because I think normally when we are asked to help, it usually means go somewhere and do something. This kind of helping means please stay home. Please don't do a lot of things away from your home. Now there are places that serve food to the poor and the hungry here where you can still volunteer. I'm guessing that might be something that a young person would want to do. There in Mexico also. Certainly if you're in a position to make a money donation, I would encourage you to make a money donation. And I guess the thing I think of too is, I keep thinking we will have some interesting stories to tell our children and our grandchildren when this is all over. So do it right. When I had surgery a few years ago and I wanted to go back to work quickly, and a friend of mine said, no, do this right, so we only have to do it one time. And I think I would say that should be the advice for all of us now too. If we can do this right, hopefully we will flatten the curve. And even if it comes back in a second wave, because they anticipate that there might be a second wave, if that could be farther apart and we've had more time for the scientists to do their work, and for the hospitals to get the gear, and above all else, for there to be enough testing equipment so that if there is a second wave, they'll be able to test people quickly, isolate them quickly. And Dr. Fauci believes that the second wave will not be as bad, at least in the US, as it was not, as the first one has been, because we'll be better prepared for it. So my advice is, it's a strange time and we're being asked to do something kind of strange. But if you were to watch the video from the man who was a hostage in Iran, he would say, yes, it's inconvenient, but it is certainly not as awful as the experience that some people are having, or that we could have if we don't take it seriously. Okay. I want to thank you so much for inviting me to do this. I would love to see your faces. Can you, as we say goodbye, could you just show your faces? Ah, that's great. Nice to see you all.
Thank you very much, Kathleen.